All right, Jadd Shickler, the CEO of Blues Funeral Recordings and vocalist in Blue Heron, and apparently many, many other things that I'm glad that you're here to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What are we going to talk about first?
Well, I don't know really where to start. I've known you from Blues Funeral for a while. I know some of the music that you put out through there, but I'm a huge fan of Black Blood of the Earth, the Blue Heron song. I love that song, awesome. And the couple singles you've put out are great. So I really want to touch on that stuff. I know you guys just put out your debut EP, and I'm sure there's more coming. I want to hit on that, but you've done so much more just in this same genre, in whatever you want to call it, desert, stoner, metal, that maybe we should start before some of that. In my opinion, kind of as a not new, but I didn't listen to this stuff back in the 90s. I didn't know it existed. I was into different kinds of metal. I was into other kinds of music. So I'm kind of a newcomer to this kind of genre, I feel like. And I love talking to people kind of about the history of it, the different bands, the different sounds, all the different things that go on. So what's your opinion, especially as a person not only in a band in it, but a person that runs a label in it, and you're involved with other record labels too, and you're involved in lots of things in this genre throughout the years. What do you see going on right now? Like this huge resurgence. There's this huge boom.
Yeah.
To me, there's never been a better time to be in like stoner metal. But I wasn't really into it when Caius was at its peak,
Sure. I don't think I was actually, I was just kind of discovering Caius right as they were coming to an end. But to me, the end of Caius, and then there was sort of like a year or 2 year gap. And then that was really where, certainly in my personal experience, and I think musically, that's where it started to kind of develop into a scene and a movement that went on to last, a couple of decades and is still going now. I mean, there's a lot of folks who will debate whether or not Caius was the origin point, but for some of us it was. And it was sort of like this void for those of us who had just gotten into and discovered Caius, and now Caius is gone. And you're just hungry for this thing that only a couple bands had done. And, only Caius had really done it their way. Monster Magnet was doing something kind of like that. Fumanchu was doing something peripheral. If you were into the Melvins, you might have connected them, although the Melvins had their own thing. But, you could count it on one hand how many bands were doing that sort of thing. And then it felt like one of the coolest and most original, Caius, was suddenly gone. And so there was this kind of scrambling around looking for it. And then people started starting bands to play the music that they were missing because Caius was gone. And so that to me was the beginning of that becoming.
Did it seem to continue at that point? Did it seem to continue pretty strongly at that point? Because to me, there was like just this gap, just from an outsider that didn't live through it necessarily. A lot of the bands that I'm into, or the bands that cite their, the bands that they were influenced by, it kind of seems like there was this gap where it was like, oh, this new thing, we're going to call it desert or stoner, is great. Sure. And then it kind of like maybe grunge, there was a line blurred between there. And then that was like, there's just like this nothing. And now there's like kind of this kind of new age of stoner or something. Did it continue pretty strongly in your opinion?
I mean, in my mind, I would say like in the early, like 2005, 2006, it felt like there was a lot of bands recycling a sound. And I don't think that they thought that they were doing that. But as somebody who was running a label at the time, it started to feel like that. Like it started to feel samey, like third and fourth tier kind of going back to the same well of that Caius influenced desert sound. And it was just falling a little flat. And that's kind of when I got out. I sold my first label, Meteor City, in 2007. And so I was sort of out of it as of about 2008, and didn't really come back to it until around 2015. And as I came back, it seemed like there was a new crop of interest, a new generation of bands, a bunch of labels just starting to form or become formed within 2012, 2013. So it seems like there was a period, and I happened to be gone from the scene, completely removed from it when that gap happened. And I learned that happened. I mean, not to say there was no bands, not to say nobody was doing it, but it definitely had a valley in the popularity and the interest and just the people dedicated to it. And then it hasn't really slowed down since then, though, since, 2014, 15, with the vinyl craze kicking in. And and just, it's certainly more diverse now in terms of like, I mean, if you look at a band like Space Slug or Dope Lord, and a band like Elephant Tree, and a band like Ruby the Hatchet, and you could kind of go around the world. I mean, these bands sonically really have nothing to do with each other, but you can, in my mind, you can kind of trace a lot of their roots back to somewhat of a similar place. Whereas in 2005, it was a lot of bands that sounded like they'd listened to a lot of Caius and Fu Manchu.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be like Black Sabbath is who everyone cites now, whether you're on like the doom sludge side or if you're on like the desert rock stoner side. They all kind of trace back to Black Sabbath. At least that's what they claim. I don't always hear it that way, but at least a lot of them are say they're influenced by it. Where I was assumed that there would be a point where a lot of them had kind of forgotten about Black Sabbath and like you said, were kind of like influenced strictly by Caius or trying to imitate Caius or any other band, Fu Manchu or something else from that same era, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody's trying to imitate anybody consciously, but you can definitely trace the bands who have been kind of listening to everything that started with like 70s proto metal and the early threads of heavy metal that was Sabbath, versus the bands who kind of discovered what they wanted to do when they heard desert rock. Like, I think the bands that can go back and, you can tell somebody who listened to King Crimson, like, oh, they're kind of doing interesting things. Even if you're not a King Crimson fan, there's more to be drawn from the entirety of like heavy music history than just what started in like 1993 in the Palm Desert, and so bands who go back further, not just to Sabbath, but all over the spectrum, I think have more to offer because they're pulling from more and they're internalizing more and creating something new out of more to begin with.
Yeah. So is this kind of resurgence of stoner metal or whatever, is that what got you back into it with Blues Funeral, or is it just a happy coincidence?
It was a fortunate coincidence. I missed it. I sold my first label at a good time where my best friend and I had started it. We ran it for a few years. It was really fun. Then he got a good job and I continued running it myself. And then it was starting to be, I was like looking ahead to the future, like, all right, it's sustaining itself sort of, but I have this debt that I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to pay off. And it doesn't feel like it's growing. It feels like it's just kind of status quoing. And I didn't see a change coming. And so when I got out, it was just like, okay, I was able to pay the debt and walk away, and I had a great 10 years. And I didn't necessarily think I was going to think about it again. And then I missed it tremendously, not just the label, but the feeling like I had this sort of business/artistic outlet. I mean, the great thing about running a record label and being in the music industry is it's both, right? It satisfies you. If you have an entrepreneurial streak, it's very satisfying. And if you feel like you have good taste in music or interesting taste in music, it's certainly satisfying to be able to go, I'm going to pick this band and this band and this band and this band and present them to the world and put my name on them as, I think people need to hear this. And if people respond, it just kind of bolsters your confidence that you're where you should be. So it's very satisfying in both those ways. And I didn't realize how much I needed that in my life until I did not have it anymore. And so when I started to find my way back, I didn't go looking for that specifically. I was just kind of starting to listen again, kind of starting to read a couple blogs again. I started writing for a couple blogs and then just sort of fell into it. I just was talking to the guy who owned and ran Magnetica Records at the time. And he just said, I need some help if you're interested in doing something again. And I said, sure, I could probably help. I need to figure out what I missed and what I don't know how to do that's changed since 2008. And I did, and kind of it drew me back in, and just immediately I was like, oh, right, this is what I was probably supposed to be doing this whole time. And I got away from it, and thank God there was an opportunity to come back to it. So. Yeah.
So what was the impetus for Meteor City? Because this was like, what'd you say, 10 years before that? This was 97?
97.
How did 97? So were you just an entrepreneurial type of kid, or did you have some sort of idea how to run a label? What was it that made you start a label at that time?
My dad had a great business mind, My brother was he's 8 years older than me, and he went to college for entrepreneurship, and that was in the 80s. And it was just sort of I was exposed to the ideas without really knowing that they were affecting me. And so I just kind of, as a young adult, was always thinking like, oh, I could start a business. Oh, I could start something that's a cool idea. And I didn't go to college expecting to do that, but I got out of college and went and got a job and went, oh man, this sucks. Like, I don't want just a shitty job. I went to college and it was great. And I thought I had all these ideas about things, but I was a huge music fan. And while I was in college, I started kind of trading bootlegs on the internet, like the brand new 1996 internet with other Caius fans around the world. And when I kind of was suddenly out of school and didn't know what the hell I was going to do, and all I knew was I definitely didn't want to work at Borders, which is where I got my first job out of college. This idea of like, hey, I bet there's other Caius fans out there who are like me, kind of looking for more music that's cool and interesting and kind of in that vein. I bet maybe we could find someone. My best friend and I like taught ourselves to build an early web page, and we paid for a shopping cart system. We just learned how to do all this stuff. It was much easier to do it because there was no judge. You couldn't be judged against great websites because there were no great websites because it was 1997.
Yeah.
So it's not like today I could go teach myself to build a website and be competitive with a great e-commerce store. I couldn't, but back then you could because nobody had really figured it out yet. So anybody could put together the clunkiest, shittiest looking website and be sort of like appealing, like, wow, we don't know what this is, but there's only like 19 websites. So this is kind of cool. Like, so we fell into it and it was like, oh crap, we have a business now, and the customers fed into it by asking us about stuff that we hadn't maybe discovered yet. And that snowballed and just opened up our awareness to more stuff that we should be doing. And then the online store just naturally kind of developed into, let's put out our own record. Let's put out our own compilation. And we basically put out a call for demos and a bunch of bands who ended up becoming pretty big in the scene. I mean, the Atomic Bitchwax, Lowrider, Dozer, 60 Watt Shaman. I mean, these are all bands we ended up getting on our first compilation, and John Garcia from Caius, and just basically ended up putting out a pretty cool record. Like, oh shit, all right, we have a label now, and learned how to run a record label and learned how to run an online business at the same time. And it was a pretty forgiving time to be trying to figure that stuff out.
So the impetus of Meteor City, you started off as more of an online, you're selling records, that kind of a thing.
Yep.
Turned into all of that is heavy, I'm assuming, with like merch and more geared towards that. When did you sign your first band, and how did you come across this band? What was your goal there at that point? Kind of starting like a real record label? Is that what Meteor City really became? Was a real record label?
It did eventually do that. I mean, the next thing after the compilation was that the guys from Nebula were on tour, and they stopped through a record store in Texas called Archie's Rock Shop, where Henry Vasquez worked. And that guy just kind of knew everybody in the beginnings of the scene. And they said, hey, we're on our way to go make a record in Seattle. We don't really have a plan, or you don't even know how we're going to pay for it. Do you know these guys from Meteor City? Maybe they want to do something. And he called me up and put us on the phone with Nebula, and they told me the deal. I said, yeah, well, sure, we'll do it. And so it just kind of fell in our laps. And they were going to do an EP. So we had the idea, well, hey, let's do a split. We'll find another band to do 4 songs. They'll do 4 songs. And Lowrider was the best band, in my opinion, on our first compilation. So it was like, hey, we got Nebula doing 4 songs. Do you want to do 4 songs for a split? So
how did you go about even finding this kind of music at this point? Because for me, doing Slightly Fuzzed, it's so simple. It couldn't be more simple. I use Instagram. Sure. I have Twitter. I mean, it's all at my fingertips every day. I can reach out to my favorite bands. I can reach out to you. I can ask you to be on the podcast. I could do anything I wanted easily within seconds. Tonight on the couch, I could do it. So at this point, I mean, the internet is there, but it's not what it is today. How are you even coming across these bands? How are you?
There were 2 websites that were sort of for fans of Caius. One was run by a guy in California. One was run by a guy in Australia. There were a couple of people that sort of, I don't know, kind of like posted their info, like, hey, I'm a big Caius fan. And they would put you in this little I don't even know what it was. It was like a little classifieds at the end of their site. And, this guy in Sweden is a Caius fan. This guy in Albuquerque, New Mexico is a Caius fan. And there weren't that many, but like you could just sort of list yourself on there. And then when we decided to start All That's Heavy, I just reached out to both sides. I'm like, hey, could you put a link to our website from your websites and like just tell people, hey, if you like Caius, maybe you like what these guys are doing. And they did. And people started just finding us because, again, there weren't that many, there wasn't that much on the internet. And there were a lot of Caius fans going, there's no Caius. It's 1997. Like, what else is there that we might like? And they would go to these two fan sites and get led to us. I mean, we got our first phone call before we knew we were open. We like answered this. We set up a landline for the business, but we lived in a big house with like 6 people. We didn't really have it figured out which phone was which yet. And like one of our housemates answered the phone. He's like, hello. They're like, yeah, is this All That's Heavy? He's like, I don't know. Like he gave us the phone. Like, and she was like, you should probably answer your business phone in a more professional way. Like, you are definitely right. We should for sure mark that this phone is for the business in case anybody else calls, because we had no idea anybody was going to call. And yeah, I mean, it was very word of mouth. And, we were fortunate enough to get like Nebula and John Garcia and Bitchwax and a couple of those bands right at the beginning. But yeah, people found us because they were
be a stroke of luck too, right there. I mean, those bands are fucking fantastic. I mean, was there something about them that you were like, we need them, there is something there? Or again, was this just another kind of happy accident that you were like, you're good enough, we'll sign you, and they turned out to be fucking great? Or
I mean, it was both. I mean, both like Bitchwax and Solace. So we put out, when we were doing that compilation, we put out a call for like, anybody who's interested, like we're basically doing a compilation album for music that fans of Caius would like. We hadn't even really defined the term desert rock yet, nobody was really stoked about the term stoner rock. So like it was kind of this unnamed music that you dug if you liked Caius and you liked Fu Manchu and Monster Magnet. So we just put the word out, and again, it just kind of went out on these couple of sites and on our little shitty webpage. And we just got demo tapes and demo CDs in the mail. And I got a demo tape that had basically Atomic Bitchwax's first recorded record that was not yet released on one side of the tape. And the back side of the tape was Solace's first like 5 or 6 song demos. And both of them, like written at the top of like their side of the tape, was a phone number in New Jersey, because they're both Jersey bands. Tried to call both of them like 15 times and could never get anybody from either band. And then we finally figured out, maybe like when we had almost filled up the whole comp, that their area of South Jersey had changed its area code. And so the phone numbers written on the tape were both wrong because the area code was wrong. And so every time we were trying to call, we couldn't get a person. And I finally got one of the guys from Bitchwax like, oh, finally got you. We got your demo tape. Do you want to be on this comp? They're like, sure. So, and then eventually Solace became one of the first bands we signed because of that same demo tape. So yeah, it was a lot of luck and a lot of like figuring out like how to reach people when it's not like it is now. There was no social media. There was no texting. It was early internet. And I mean, you could connect with people, but it wasn't the way it is now.
Yeah. So did you put out Ode to I.O. then for Lowrider?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I again, like I'm kind of new to all this stuff. So like I'm, just discovering Lowrider a handful of years ago.
Sure.
And for me, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I was looking for. I'm looking for that kind of like deserty, fuzzy sound. I like Rollerball. I like Astro Queen. I love that Lowrider album. And I'm going around looking now for like other Lowrider music. And I'm like, oh, that was 20 years ago almost. Like, damn, they only put one on record. What a bummer. And then 2020 comes about and they put out the best record of the year, in my opinion. And on your label again. I mean, you just have this working relationship with them, and what a stroke of luck that you found Lowrider at this point where they put out this record too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Peter, the main guy in the band, was 16 when they started. And that's when we were kind of just fielding submissions for that compilation. And he sent us their first 2 songs that he basically did all himself on his little, kind of half-assed home recording setup. But there was like a magic to it. It's like, this is great. And they became the first band we signed because it was just so good. And it was just, we were there right from the beginning with him and with them, and they never had like sort of rock star ambitions, but there was something about what they were doing that resonated. And so they were the first band we really signed in a proper way. We did that split, and then we did Odio, but then they just kind of like, I don't know, they were still writing a little bit for a little while, but everybody kind of grew up a little bit and went and got jobs, and they went in different directions. I mean, Peter was still, a lot of them were still musicians, but they just weren't doing the Lowrider thing. And then he and I was going to say, he and I kind of reconnected like in 2015, and just sort of talking for the first time. And the early relationship was all email and stuff. And then 2015, we could just, we could have messenger conversations. We could call each other on FaceTime. And, so it was a different way to reconnect. And he was just like, yeah, I think I'm ready to start doing this again. I'm like, well, perfect. Cause I have an idea for a label project again, if you're interested. And he ended up, I mean, I don't know if you know this. I mean, he's my art director, basically my creative partner on Postwax, which is the idea that I came up with when I started thinking about doing a label again, because I didn't want to just be another label. I wanted to have like a reason to do it that would differentiate it. And he loved the concept behind it to the extent where, I mean, he's a professional designer and director. So he got on board to help me put the whole thing together, and we essentially developed it as a team. And it just made natural sense. Like, if you were ever going to return to Lowrider, maybe this is the vehicle to do it. And he agreed.
Yeah. I started kind of like unweaving this like web of Lowrider a few months ago, and noticed that he had done the artwork for like the new Greenleaf album.
Oh yeah.
As well as Zone album and all these things. And I'm putting all these things together going, holy shit. Like, and not to mention the fact that you're just gone for 20 years, decided to put out this amazing record in 2020.
Well, he has a band. He had a band. I don't know if I should say had or has, because I guess the band could do something whenever he feels like it. But he's got another band called IR Droid that's not as heavy or as deserty, but really cool in its own right. And he did a couple records with them in like the 2010s. So again, he hasn't left music behind completely, but it wasn't like his main thing. Like he'd show up on a Greenleaf record, or he'd show up and do something with one of the guys from Dozer, or on a Truck Fighters project or something. And he's always doing he'd do art and design for Crippled Black Phoenix and Greenleaf and whoever else. So he was always there, and he was friends with a lot of these guys. And it just the impetus to try to figure out the Lowrider thing again, I don't want to totally speak for him, but it seems like wasn't powerful enough to make him recommit to it until he finally did. And then, and I think there was a bit of pressure too. I mean, Ota Io was this beloved record, and the more time that passed since Ota Io came out, I think the harder it was to conceive. Like,
yeah, you have a Chinese democracy kind of thing going on where, how can you follow up to this thing how can you ever make music again 20 years later? I mean, you skip that whole like gradual, progression. You just jump from one to the other, and it's got to be impossible, but they did it. I mean, very few bands do it, and they did it.
Right. It'd be very easy if nobody cared about your first band, but if your first band is beloved and put out this record that was kind of a cornerstone of what became a scene for the next 20 years. Yeah, that's pressure. I mean, I get it.
But they nailed it. They fucking nailed it head on, man. And word on the street is that they're working on some new material for next year. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, well, it's going to be part of. So I mean, we're doing Postwax again, which it's going to be a 9 release series, and Lowrider and the guys from Elephant Tree are doing like a combined split release for the next Postwax series, and which is perfect because Lowrider is the first band I ever signed, and like just sort of has this place in my heart that can't possibly be replaced by anybody else. And Elephant Tree is the band that brought me back to the scene and the style in 2015. They're the band that was on Magnetic Eye that I heard and thought, oh my God, this band is amazing. And I contacted Magnetic Eye to do an interview with them for a blog I was writing for. And that's what led me to Magnetic Eye's owner saying, hey, if you want to get involved with the label, I could use some help. So, Elephant Tree is sort of responsible for that. And Lowrider has just, been a part of my musical identity for 20 plus years. So cool. They're doing a split together where they're each going to do like, I think 3 original songs, and they're actually going to do a joint, like a collaborative song together.
Cool. So, I there's not too many bands that do collaborative songs, but I think it's such a cool thing. And like, hip hop and country. Like they do it all the time, but it's such a rare thing for like rock and metal. And what I think it was like Cadaver maybe or something like that, or
yeah, the Elder and Cadaver thing that came out.
Yeah, like they did this whole album together, and I'm like, I wish more bands would do that. It's such a cool thing, and especially if you're not like looking to make another album 1 year later after you made the last one or something. Like do something different, do something creative with another band that you respect. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, they kind of had that idea themselves. I mean, I love Elephantry, and I was always kind of making it known to them, if you ever want to do something again, we should. And yeah, they were like, hey, we would do something if we could be on a record with Lowrider. And I'm like, well, I know Peter loves your band, so that that ought to be a fairly easy matter to arrange. So yeah.
Cool. So tell me about your band then. Spiritu first. This was around maybe that same time, starting Meteor City, or after?
After, yeah, it was like 2000 we started.
Okay. Extremely hard to find any music online. I don't know if you know that or not, but I looked and looked. It was very difficult. I did end up finding a couple. Fat Man in Thailand for one, which I loved, but really not easy to find music out there.
Yeah, no, I need to actually put some of it back out on digital services. I mean, for the the 4 people like yourself who go looking for it. No, I just I got into this as a music fan, but I always kind of sang for my own interest, but I hadn't, it wasn't that story where somebody starts a band and then they have to start a record label to put out their own thing. I had the record label, I wasn't in a band, and then I decided maybe I would give it a try. And I went and tried out for this local band here, thinking I was gonna get the gig, and I didn't get the gig. And then I was in touch with this band from DC, like in the DC kind of Maryland doom scene, called Iron Man, and they had a tour booked, and I knew their bass player a little bit, or the bass player at the time, and she was like, yeah, we have a tour booked, and our singer can't go, and our drummer can't go, but we're gonna get this dude from Florida to come up and play drums. And I'm like, well, I'll come sing for you. And she's like, great, when can you get here? I'm like, what? You never even heard me sing. She's like, if you think you can do it, we need you, because we gotta go on this tour. So I'm like, wow, really? And this was like March of 2000. So I learned a bunch of their songs, went out, we had like 3 practices, and then I just went and did like a 3.5-week tour in the Midwest with Iron Man as their fill-in singer, and got home and was just like, oh my God, that was awesome. I really need to figure this out. So there was a guy named Shay. He's from a town about 2.5 hours north of here, of Albuquerque, and he was a customer, and he was just like, hey, I got a buddy who plays guitar. If you're ever looking to do something, he's ready. He's into it. And Shay introduced me to him, and we kind of had a couple of hits and misses as far as other members, but we ended up starting Spiritu together. And yeah, and it was it was kind of all of our first real band. So yeah, by the end of 2000, we had like the lineup that was there for like to start, I don't know, to make our first record. And yeah, we put out a record and a split. I put it out on Meteor City because I had the label, and it just was like, all right, this will be easy. I didn't think a whole lot about like, will this be taken seriously in the same way because it's my band and my label? Later, I would reflect on that and be like, I don't know if I ever want to do that again. If I'm ever in a band again, I don't think I want to put out my own music, because I want it to be taken seriously. I want people to either dig it or not dig it, just based on what it sounds like, and not sort of have other stuff tied up in it, like, oh, the label guy's putting out his own record. No, no kidding. Right. So, yeah, so we did it for a few years, and then it just kind of fell by the wayside in about 2005. And then a few years ago, I moved back to Albuquerque and was still in touch with my old guitarist. And I don't know, I'd grown up a bit, he'd grown up a bit, and I still kind of we were interested in pursuing that creative outlet again. And yeah, and it's funny, that first band that I mentioned that I tried out for in 2000 that I didn't get the gig, we became friends with their guitarist. His name's Big Steve, and he's a big scene guy. He knows all the musicians in Albuquerque. So when me and my guitarist started trying to put something together, I asked Steve, I'm like, hey, you have any idea who we should get as a drummer? And he's like, oh, you got to get this guy. And he told me the name, and I found him on Facebook or whatever, and sent him a message on Messenger. I'm like, hey, this is who I am. And I don't know if you're interested. And first I got what I thought was like the most like brush off response. It was like, yeah, I like to play drums. And that was the message back. I'm like, yeah, he probably, because he's awesome. I was like, he must get hit up all the time. And he's just like, yeah, I'm sure you would like me to come play drums in your band. Like, yeah. And then maybe like 2 hours later, he's like, oh shit, I know who you are. And he sent me a photo of that first compilation that we had put out.
Oh, really?
The Welcome to Your City compilation, which is now 20 years old. He's like, I know who you are. You're here. Like, I'm like, yeah. And then ended up getting Big Steve, who was just trying to help us out. He ended up joining the band as the bass player. So it's me and two guys I've known for 20 something years. One of whom was my original guitarist. One of whom was in the band that originally didn't take me when I tried out for his band. And the drummer that he thought was like the best drummer in town that he thought we should go get. So we got.
And that's what became Blue Heron.
That's what became Blue Heron. Yeah.
So, I mean, you have all this access to these record labels. We haven't even gotten to really Magnetic Eye that much, but a Ripple as well, sure. Plus Blues Funeral. So, I mean, is there ever any ambition to re-release any of that Spirit 2 material?
I just talked to Chav, my guitarist, the other night about that. And we're probably just going to sort of quietly add it to Bandcamp and just have it there, like with a little explanation, like this is the band that has a couple of the guys that eventually became Blue Heron, for anybody who's interested or cares. I mean, you can find it on, you can find some of it on YouTube. It's not on digital services anymore, but we've got the rights to it. We can put it back out there. I don't know. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, you can go back and look at something that you did 20 years earlier, and sometimes you're proud of it, and sometimes you're like, oh, Jesus. And it's just.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And there's been a few people that have been like in bands, and you go and listen to their early stuff and you go, oh, I see why you left. I see why you don't talk about it. But I didn't get that. I didn't get that feeling from Spirit 2. I actually liked it, and I wanted to hear more, but it was so fucking hard to find.
Right. Well, yeah, we'll put it back on our Bandcamp at some point, just as kind of a document. This is what we did, and aren't you glad that we got better in the last 20 years?
Yeah. So, all right. So insert Blue Heron now.
Sure.
Like I said, I love Black Blood of the Earth. Just that the second I was sitting on the couch downstairs and we were watching a movie, and I saw the single, like the little video that you post on Instagram or something, and I was just listening to it real quietly so that I wasn't disturbing my girlfriend while she was watching this movie. And I just heard the drums, and I was like, oh, I don't even have to hear any more. I'm gonna fucking love this song. I know it already. So I didn't even listen to the rest of it. I waited until the next day. I could put it on my speakers. And I was right. It's fucking fantastic. I still love it. I listen to it all the time. It's a great like workout song, and I love it a lot. So you only have like 2 songs out at this point. Not counting some covers, the AC/DC cover and stuff like that. Right. But you just played a show, I know, with High Desert Queen and stuff. You must have other songs out there.
Yeah, well, we recorded a whole album earlier this year, and coming from the label side of things, I just wanted to be sort of thoughtful and intentional about how we did whatever we did. I get hit up by bands all the time who are like, hey, we'd love somebody to put out our record on vinyl. We already released it on Spotify. Like, well, I know there's some labels that do that, but I always feel like if you really want a label to do their best for you, there has to be planning and thinking and you kind of put together, you do everything on a certain schedule, according to a certain process. I mean, it's not very exciting. Doesn't sound very rock to think that like that, but you have to think like that if you want to maximize the possibility of, the impact and people hearing it and so forth. So I was trying to apply a lot of that to whatever we were going to do. I mean, not that it was solely my decision, but I shared this stuff with the band and was like, hey, I would rather not release our music on the labels I work with. It would be cool to find somebody else who's into it just because they dig it and they'd like to get behind it. But as a record label, I always love to see when bands are proactive and showing that they're willing to and able to do stuff on their own. So what if we self-release like a 7-inch and put a couple songs out, and we'll play some decent shows behind it, and we'll get on this, this one of the Redux compilations that I do for Magnetic Eye. I don't mind using my access for my own band when it comes to something like that, because it's a cover and everybody loves AC/DC. So so we basically just decided to put out the 2-song 7-inch out and kind of carve that out of the tracks we recorded for the record while we were shopping the record. And that way we can kind of tell labels, hey, this is who we are, this is what we've done, or this is what we're in the process of doing. And just, as opposed to the band who's essentially like, hey, we're a stoner rock band from here. please sign us and do everything, which no band says that, but there's sometimes you sense that that's essentially what they're saying, which is we're really good at the music stuff. We need somebody to do everything else. And I always love it when bands are kind of like, we actually understand a lot of the stuff. We're doing social media marketing. We made our own video. We dropped 2 songs on Spotify, and here's some of our numbers, and here's what we're doing to kind of build those and that sort of thing. So I just try to put myself in the position of what do I like to see as a label from a band, and then, hey guys, maybe we could do that. And everybody
just heard Todd from Ripple just the other day posted some video or something about it, and he was talking about the same thing, going, if you're wondering how to get on Ripple, like, it's very simple. Like, we want to see that you're trying. We want to see that you're out there and sharing stuff on social and being active, and like I couldn't imagine that it being like that 30 years ago or 20 years ago or anything, where they're just like, these guys were degenerates just barely playing their instruments, and that was enough, and now you have to be like tech savvy and a marketer.
Yeah, and you really show like the downside to working with you if you aren't those things. Or I mean, it's so easy now to do these things on your own, that if your way of approaching me as a label is to send me a YouTube link in the direct message of my Instagram account with no further explanation, there's no excuse for that. Come on.
I mean, I've thought about that even for Slightly Fuzzed, for even just being a guest on the podcast. A lot of people will send me stuff or ask to be like on the playlist that I have on Spotify and stuff.
Sure.
And which I love. I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. I love it. It makes my job much easier. But the people that go, hey, I've seen your stuff. I like the list. I want you to check out this song. Here's what we're about, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. I love it. The people that just send one link, I go, what? Like, it's just strange, kind of like I owe it to them or something to like check out their, and it's very strange. It's
right. Kind of we're so good. We're going to give you no justification or context for this.
No context, no explanation, nothing. Just here's a song, here's a link. Right. You do the rest. You do the work. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Exactly. Yeah. So coming from the label side, obviously I have a degree of cynicism, but I'm just like, all right, I know what I hate to see as a label guy. So let's not do that as a band. And I mean, we haven't officially announced it yet, but we basically have 2 labels that are kind of going to co-release, because we were lucky to have 2 different labels both respond to us kind of just reaching out to labels we thought were cool with the record and saying that they're interested. So we have Cosmic Artifacts in Europe who's going to put out the album over there, and then Seeing Red in the US is going to do it over here. So
do you have a date for that?
Like April-ish, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, not too far behind. Like, I mean, it's great because we just got to play a release show for the 7-inch.
Yeah.
We'll go through the holidays. We'll do some writing and stuff in January, and then kind of start planning for promoting the record.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, us too. With the pandemic and vinyl production lead times being what they are and so forth, I mean, it's already 8 months since we recorded it. So,
right.
Yeah, we're pretty anxious.
So I kind of mentioned that you had some connection with Ripple and Magnetic Eye and stuff. How does that work exactly? Where you have your own label, you work with other labels. There's no like conflict of interest or anything. Like, what exactly is that relationship like?
I mean, so when I first started coming back to the scene, I went and started writing for blogs. The blog I wrote for was The Ripple Effect, which is Todd that's Ripple Music's blog.
Yeah.
And I didn't know him. I actually was talking to JJ from the Obelisk, and he's like, yeah, you should talk to Todd. And so I did. And Todd was like, yeah, sure. We could always use writers. And I wrote a few pieces for them and got to know Todd a little bit just over email and so forth, got a little bit of a feel for who he was and so forth. And so we were already in touch. And then my actual entrance back into working for labels was what I told you about Magnetic Eye. So I was really just doing the Magnetic Eye thing, but I always had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to maybe do my own thing again. I mean, Magnetic Eye was founded by this guy, Mike Vitale, who had a great vision for what he wanted and a certain musical aesthetic. And I was essentially, I signed a couple bands for Magnetic Eye, but for a while back when he was when he was still in charge of it. But it was essentially his vision, which was great. And I was just kind of helping execute on that and using what I kind of knew how to do. And then I just still had that itch to have something that was entirely mine. And I didn't necessarily want to compete with Magnetic Eye. I just wanted to do something where it was going to live or die based on my own ideas, how I wanted to run it, what kind of music I wanted to put out. And that is essentially what became Blues Funeral. And so it turned into more of a label than I maybe anticipated at the time. I really thought it was going to be essentially a company that existed purely to put out this post-wax series, which is just supposed to be a series of one-offs, not signing bands, not competing with labels that are signing bands, but just like this sort of curated series. Like, hey, if you like this type of music, just subscribe to Post-Wax and we will send you these exclusive releases that stand on their own. And I was very content with that idea. And then it kind of grew beyond that to a degree where I ended up putting out a couple albums that I hadn't planned to do, but I still was never thinking of myself as a competitor to Magnetic Eye. And then I had a day job at the time that I was actually still working. The last real day job I had in 2018. And I found that during the day I was sort of sneakily doing more of my Magnetic Eye work and my setup for Blues Funeral, and my attention was drifting away from my regular work. And so I ended up quitting that job in July of 2018 and was just kind of like, before I'm not a kid, my wife and I need money and so forth, but before I go get another job like that, where I'm going to be continuing to try to tread water in this way psychologically, let's just see if there's any chance that the people that I know and the stuff that I know how to do could translate into me actually being able to work in this industry. So we basically spent about a year going into debt, living on loans and credit and so forth, where I was still doing Magnetic Eye, building Blues Funeral. That's when I reached out to Todd from Ripple and essentially said, hey, do you need anything? And he said, sure, maybe you could come on and do it this and this and this and this. But again, Ripple is Todd's label. So I didn't really I wasn't concerned like that we're going to end up fighting over any bands, because Mike was the primary signer for Magnetic Eye. Todd is the guy who signs all the bands for Ripple. And all I'm doing is essentially making sure stuff runs properly and, production happens on time and then PR happens and so forth. So I was able to kind of balance those for a little while. And then in 2019, I actually found a buyer for Magnetic Eye that Mike was interested in getting out of Magnetic Eye if he could and having somebody take it over. And I actually found someone, the company that owns Prophecy, which is a big kind of German avant-garde metal label, bought Magnetic Eye and brought me on to continue to run it. So that's probably when it became the closest to, now is there a conflict of interest, because now I'm kind of I'm the guy behind Magnetic Eye signing bands and so forth, but I also still do work for Ripple. But I just haven't found it to be the case because they're kind of different animals. Todd has a very specific way of structuring his deals. He also has his own ear as far as what he likes. And we really haven't, I think we've maybe run into it one time. And when I say run into it, it wasn't like an issue. It was just kind of like there was a band that I was interested in that I didn't know Todd was looking at until the guy from the band told me. He's like, yeah, I appreciate it, but I think I'm going to go with Ripple. Like, I didn't even know you were talking to Ripple, but what can I say? I mean, Todd's a great guy and I get it. So I'll still end up working on your record. So, I'll see you next year.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned the what do you call them? The redo albums. You did the
Redux. Yeah.
The Redux albums. You did the AC/DC one recently, two of them, the best of and Back in Black. And there's been a kind of a series of them. I don't know if you've been involved with all of the ones that I've seen. There's been a handful of like Doom related cover albums, but I think there's been a couple Pink Floyd ones. There was an Alice in Chains one last year, maybe. There's been a handful of them, but those are so fascinating to me. They're so interesting to me because I think that like, covers kind of get a bad rap sometimes, and sometimes they do really suck. But when they're done right, when they sound like a new band, when they sound like a new song, and you do them in your own way as a band, like I find them so fascinating. I'm always looking forward to those. And the AC/DC one that just came out is no different. It was really cool. I know Blue Heron had a song on there, which was great. but any of them. And AC/DC is such an interesting one because they're so, like, you can just tell what AC/DC is. The voice is so specific, and it still sounded awesome. I mean, like, I could have imagined Alice in Chains or Pink Floyd done by stoner bands. I didn't understand how this was going to work with AC/DC. I was like, how the fuck are these bands going to sound like AC/DC?
Yeah.
And it was great. It was beautiful. It was like every band kind of took it on their own and they ran with it. And I love them. I think they're so fascinating.
I think there was an intimidation factor with the AC/DC one too, because it was actually harder. So you mentioned I didn't work with Magnetic Eye on the Hendrix one. That was the first one they did. That Mike did that one all on his own, and he had basically put together the Helmet one, and that's pretty much right when I started working for the labels. I came on just as that was coming out. So my first one was the Floyd one, and I helped a lot, picking some of the bands and organizing that one and doling out some of the songs and really bringing that thing to fruition. So that was my first of the series. But yeah, the Floyd one was actually comparatively pretty easy because everybody loves Pink Floyd, and a lot of people have never thought about how they would kind of reimagine Pink Floyd themselves. But if you're starting out with something that isn't innately super heavy, there's a lot that a heavy band can do. The Sabbath one was almost kind of like, eventually you have to do Sabbath. So we did. And again, and it was cool. But the AC/DC one was really like, I think a lot of people really couldn't figure out what they would do with AC/DC because it took a while for me to actually get all the songs kind of allocated and get the right bands on board to do what they did. I'm super stoked with how it came together, but that was the toughest one out of any that I had worked on. I mean, I'm really pleased with how it came together. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The biggest missed opportunity is a band who goes in and just does a faithful note for note cover of an original, especially when you have a chance to be part of something like this where you're rebuilding and reimagining the record from one end to the other. Why would you want to be the band who just essentially plays the song?
Yeah.
Like, this is your chance to show what you would do, what this music means to you, what this song means to you. Internalize it, digest it, spit something else back out that is both familiar and completely unfamiliar, but entirely you guys. That's your chance to do that. Do that.
And it's so awesome when they do it right. I mean, I talked to Kal-El on here, and this was before the AC/DC stuff was out, but I knew it was coming. I knew they had a song on it, and they had done just a couple covers in the past. I think they had like maybe 2 or 3 in their back pocket.
Right.
And they're a band that really takes it and runs with it. And I was excited to hear their contribution to the AC/DC as well, because you can tell like the song structure is maybe a little different than what you're used to with Kal-El.
Right.
But there's something so familiar about their sound, the voice, how they play, the tone, everything, and they make it their own. And I just love them. I love the whole series, and even the ones that you're not necessarily involved with, but there's been a lot out there. And when they're done right, man, they're just so awesome.
No, it's been great. And as you said, I mean, covers and tribute albums can be a dime a dozen. So you really have to be thoughtful about like choosing the band, choosing how you put it together, choosing who's going to be part of it. And it takes kind of however long it takes. Like, you can't rush it. I'm working on a Soundgarden one now, and it's very possible this one's going to take as long as the AC/DC one did, because Soundgarden is another band. A lot of people love them. Not everybody's want to take them on for obvious reasons, especially vocally, right? So,
yeah, that'll be interesting too, because I was just telling someone this the other day. Soundgarden was always one of those bands where I just kind of chalked it up to being like, I don't know, safe dad rock, like it was on the radio all the fucking time growing up. When I was in high school, Soundgarden was on the radio every fucking day. And I wasn't even into it at that point. I had moved on to heavier stuff. I liked grunge. I liked Alice in Chains and Nirvana and even some Soundgarden. But like, after hearing Black Hole Sun every 30 minutes for like 3 years, I was like, I just don't care about Soundgarden at all. Like, I don't care. And I really never checked them out. I mean, I had heard all their hits. I had heard a handful of other songs that they have done, but I just never cared. And it was pretty recently, within like the last year, I had just had so many people over the years go, I think you'd really like them. I mean, Chris Cornell's amazing. And like, I think you'd really like their sound. You like that kind of music. And I'm like, all right, fine. I'll go back and I'll check them out. And I was like, holy shit, this is great. And now I'm going around telling people, like, have you heard of Chris Cornell?
He's fucking you heard of this band Soundgarden? They're fantastic. Yeah, pretty much go back and listen to like 4th of July and Limo Wreck, and you're just like,
4th of July is one of them. And what's the one? Like Suicide?
Oh, yeah.
Was one of my favorite songs on that record. I was like, God damn, this is what I've been missing out for all these years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, that'll be cool. So, okay. So what can we expect from Blue Heron or Blues Funeral next year? Anything special? What can we look forward to?
Well, Post-Wax Volume 2 was supposed to be happening this year. Vinyl production delayed that, but it will be happening next year. So the Josiah record is the first release on Post-Wax. Then the comeback album from Mammoth Volume. Then the new album from the Otolith, which is essentially the band that formed from the ashes of Sub Rosa. Then a one-off from Dead Meadow. And then I think probably the Acid King record will all be coming next year as part of Post-Wax. Cool. For those who actually subscribe to Post-Wax. And then we'll be doing sort of like the standalone kind of standard retail versions of each of those a couple months behind the Post-Wax version. So comparatively to a quieter year for Blues Funeral, we only had 2 records out, just again because it was harder to get stuff out. But next year, everything that was supposed to happen this year will be coming. And then, yeah, my band Blue Heron will be dropping our record. And Magnetic Eye has a ton of big stuff coming next year as well. I mean, Best Far Yeltsin, who's on the Back in Black Redux, they've got their next full length coming out. Ruby the Hatchet, who's kind of our biggest signing to date, they've got a new album coming probably mid-year. Costa Casanova, who's kind of one of the most hungry, ambitious up-and-comers that we have on the label. I mean, they're out touring right now as we're recording this. I mean, they're pretty much touring under their own power, and they've got a new record in the can that's coming out. So we're gonna have a bunch of stuff on Magnetic Eye next year. And don't even get me started on Ripple. I don't know how Ripple manages to maintain the volume of output, but I'm always just trying to keep up. I'm hanging on by a thread at all times on my Ripple responsibilities just to keep up with all the stuff Todd's got in the works. So there's a lot.
And you did say something was happening with Lowrider next year, right?
Well, they're definitely recording the split with Elephant Tree.
Okay.
And so when that drops is pretty much entirely up to them and the status of vinyl production and, you know, the worldwide, whatever, supply chain bullshit.
Yeah.
So
okay.
It'd be pretty easy for a band to go in the studio and they'd send a master and, 3.5 months later we could have a record out. It's not like that right now. I look forward to those days coming back, but there's not much indication that that's going to happen anytime super soon. So we'll just keep operating within the schedule that is allowable for us. And it's a weird time to be in the music business when the most efficient thing is bands turning in their records on time, and
right.
The least predictable thing is everything else.
Yeah, never would have thought, right?
No.
So I don't know how familiar you are with Slightly Fuzzed or the podcast, but we do a lot with goofy, ridiculous album covers and such. And at the end of the podcast, we often play a game called Real or Fuzzed. And I show you a series of usually album covers that are ridiculous. Some are real and some are made by me. And we call those Fuzzed. Okay. I made a special edition for you. These are all record labels. So you're going to tell me if they are real record labels or if they are fuzzed record labels.
All right.
So this is the first one. It's called Bonerizing Records.
I'm going to say fuzzed.
This is, in fact, a real record label.
All right.
Bonerizing. Wet Dreams Recordings.
That feels real.
This is real. I think this might be like electronic music, but it is in fact real.
All right.
Too High Records.
That also feels real.
This is fuzzed.
All right.
I made that one.
Well, if you're thinking of starting one though, you should probably hang on to that logo.
Yeah. for your next endeavor. I can tell it to you. Iomium.
Fuzzed?
This is real.
Come on.
Yeah.
With the mustache and the logo?
Yep, that's it. That's it right there. They have some heavy bands in there. You should check them out.
Oh, my goodness.
Big Old Balls Records.
I really don't want that to be real. I'm going to go Fuzzed.
This is Fuzzed. Yeah, for sure.
Thank God.
The Dregs Records.
That's real.
That is real. I've had Shane on the podcast, but I thought I'd give him a shout.
Yeah, I know that.
Okay. Wet Pants Records.
Fuzzed?
This is Fuzzed. Yeah.
Right.
This might be from like a kid's book, actually.
You're restoring my faith in the creativity of small business owners.
Stiffy Recording Company.
Boy, that seems like it. I like the logo. It seems like it could be real. Real?
This is Fuzzed.
All right. Well, nice job on the logo.
Thank you. Crippled Dick Hot Wax.
That's real, right?
That is real. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that you might know a couple of these, but that logo is absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
So, Fueled by Ramen.
Real?
That is real.
I don't know why I know that one, but I recognize the name.
Yeah. Erect Records.
I'm gonna go Fuzzed.
That's real.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well,
It looks like it might be like a stoner type of record company, but I'm not sure if that's true.
thinking about the amount of time I agonized over naming things in my career, and
Yeah.
you show me some of these, I'm like,
You could have just went with Big Old Balls Records.
I guess so. Still available.
Sunset Hand Job.
Fuzzed.
That one is real as well.
Holy hell.
Yeah. Again, I think that one might be more like electronic type music, but definitely real.
I feel like I failed that contest, but also the owners of some of those labels kind of failed all of us in a way.
Yeah. So I think you did okay there. That was a particularly ridiculous round of Real or Fuzz, by the way.
Right.
But that's it. That's all I got for you, man. I appreciate your time. I loved hearing about kind of, what was going on in the scene early on and how you got into it and all the things you're involved with. You're a very busy person and you've done a lot for stoner metal and desert rock and all that kind of stuff. So appreciate your time, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great time talking about it all.
Yeah. All right, Wen. We'll stay in touch. I'm looking forward to what you have coming out next year.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, let's definitely stay in touch.
Cool. See ya.
Speak to you soon.